Linda Evans was the golden face of primetime television in the 1980s, a woman who seemed to embody elegance, grace, and success. Yet behind the polished image was a private life filled with pain, betrayal, and devastating choices. At 81, she has finally spoken with raw honesty about the relationship that nearly destroyed her and, paradoxically, gave her the push to achieve her greatest triumph. This is the story of how love, control, and heartbreak shaped the woman the world came to know as Crystal Carrington. The meeting that changed everything. Before Dynasty ever came into Linda Evans' life, there was John Derek. Their paths first crossed in the late 1960s while Linda was still a rising actress. She had already gained recognition on the television western The Big Valley, which ran from 1965 until its cancellation in 1969. At that point, she was still very young, filled with ambition, and open to the possibilities of Hollywood. John Derek, however, was 30 years older, a man with an established reputation in the industry. He was known not just as an actor and director, but also as someone whose personal life drew as much attention as his professional work. Evans admitted years later that she had been infatuated with him since she was a teenager, even telling her sister that one day she would marry him. To her, Derek seemed almost like destiny fulfilled. When they married in 1968, she thought she had achieved not only a personal dream, but also a partnership that would support her through the pressures of Hollywood. She was 25, full of optimism, while he was entering middle age with a long history of complicated relationships. From the beginning, their dynamic was uneven. Derek had already been married multiple times, including to glamorous figures such as Patti Bears and Ursula Andress. His attraction to younger women was well known, and Evans, with her beauty and vulnerability, fit the pattern. At first, Linda saw this as a passionate and consuming love, one she believed was worth sacrificing for. But soon, the cracks began to show. Derek discouraged her from pursuing her acting career, framing it as a choice for the good of their marriage. Evans, eager to please and deeply in love, agreed. She stopped working regularly, putting aside her ambitions. What she did not realize at the time was that she was giving up her independence piece by piece. Derek began to dictate other aspects of her life as well, how she should dress, who she could see, and what her role as his wife should be. What looked like devotion from the outside was, in reality, control. Evans has described those years as a time when she lost her own identity. She believed she was living the dream, but slowly she was being reshaped into someone else's version of perfection. By the early 1970s, her world had narrowed, and the cost of that choice was becoming impossible to ignore: the betrayal and collapse of the marriage. By 1973, the marriage between Linda Evans and John Derek had reached a breaking point. What had once seemed like a dream union was now suffocating. Derek's obsessive need for control left Evans feeling as though no part of her life was her own. She had given up her career, her independence, and even her sense of self, all in the hope that her devotion would be enough to sustain their relationship. But it wasn't. That year, Evans discovered the truth that shattered her world. Derek had begun an affair with another woman. It was not just any woman, but Bo Derek, who at the time was barely 18 years old. The betrayal was crushing. For Linda, the humiliation went beyond infidelity. It confirmed a pattern Derek had repeated throughout his life, falling for younger, impressionable women and molding them to fit his vision. Evans, once the chosen one, was now discarded for someone younger, someone she could never compete with. The timing of the affair was particularly devastating. Evans was only in her early 30s, still at an age where her career could have flourished, but she had spent much of the past decade stepping away from the spotlight. When Derek left her for Bo, she felt she had nothing: no marriage, no career, and no clear identity. She would later confess that the heartbreak was so profound she thought she could not survive it. In interviews decades later, she admitted to believing she would rather die than face the devastation of losing the man she had once considered her destiny. By 1974, the marriage was officially over. Derek married Bo later that same year, only after she turned 18. Their union would last until his death in 1998, but for Linda, the collapse of her marriage marked both an ending and an unexpected beginning. In hindsight, Evans calls this period one of the darkest of her life, yet she also acknowledges that it forced her to confront truths she had long ignored. Derek did not want her to work, and had she stayed with him, she believes she never would have returned to acting. It was in the ashes of that failed marriage that she began to rebuild, not as someone's wife, but as her own woman. The pain of betrayal was still raw, but for the first time in years, Linda felt an urge to reclaim what she had given up. She picked up the phone and called her agent, ready to try again. The response was sobering. "You've been away for so long. Everyone's forgotten about you." It was a harsh reminder of how much time she had sacrificed. Still, Evans refused to give in to despair. "I don't know," she told him, "but I've just got to do it." What followed would not be easy. The industry had moved on, and she had to start almost from scratch. But the courage to make that call was the first step on the road to her greatest triumph, picking up the pieces and finding a career again. After the collapse of her marriage to John Derek in 1973 and their divorce in 1974, Linda Evans faced the daunting task of rebuilding a life she barely recognized. She was in her early 30s, a time when many actresses were fighting to keep their careers alive, but she had been out of the spotlight for years. The entertainment industry is unforgiving, and her agent warned her bluntly. People had forgotten her. Still, Evans knew she had to try. The first step was re-entering Hollywood, a place that could be both merciless and rewarding. She began pursuing roles again, though it was far from easy. Casting directors were skeptical, and the long gap in her resume raised doubts about whether she could regain her footing. Yet Evans carried with her a new determination, born from the heartbreak she had endured. She no longer wanted to depend on a man's approval to define her life. She was ready to stand on her own. In 1975, Evans remarried, this time to Stan Herman, a Los Angeles real estate broker. At first, it seemed like another chance at happiness, but the relationship was short-lived. The marriage ended in 1979, lasting only 4 years. By then, Evans realized she could not keep searching for fulfillment through marriage alone. She had to choose her own dream instead of hoping to live through someone else's. In her own words, she told herself, "You better just stop this thing of the man's going to be my dream and go for another dream." Her return to acting was gradual, with guest appearances and smaller roles that reminded the industry of her presence. She pushed through the doubts and setbacks, determined to prove that she was more than just John Derek's former wife. By the late 1970s, she was finally regaining momentum, and in 1980, a script landed on her desk that would change her life forever. It was called Oil. At first, Evans didn't know that Oil would be retitled and transformed into one of the most successful primetime soap operas of the decade. She only knew that it offered a role unlike any she had been given before, a chance to shine at a moment when her career seemed close to disappearing. She read the script, felt the potential, and said yes. That decision set her on the path to becoming Crystal Carrington, a role that would not only define her career, but also prove to the world and to herself that her comeback was possible, Dynasty, and the peak of fame. When Oil officially launched in 1981 under its new name Dynasty, Linda Evans stepped into the role of Crystal Carrington. It was the opportunity she had fought so hard to reclaim, and it arrived at exactly the right moment. Crystal, the compassionate and resilient wife of oil tycoon Blake Carrington, was the emotional anchor of the show. Evans' portrayal was graceful yet strong, capturing the attention of millions of viewers every week. For 8 years, from 1981 through 1989, Dynasty dominated television ratings and became one of the most talked-about shows of the decade. Linda Evans was no longer the actress who had stepped away from Hollywood at the insistence of her controlling husband. She was now a household name in her own right. Alongside stars like John Forsythe and Joan Collins, she helped turn Dynasty into a cultural phenomenon. The role brought her awards, recognition, and most importantly, validation. Evans poured herself into the character, channeling her own experiences of heartbreak and survival into Crystal's struggles on screen. Audiences saw authenticity in her performance, a depth that came from someone who had truly known loss and resilience. For Evans, it was more than just acting. It was healing. Behind the scenes, Evans was acutely aware of the irony. Had she stayed with John Derek, who demanded she abandon her career, she never would have been part of Dynasty. She later reflected that, sometimes when the worst thing happens to you in your life, it's actually the best thing that ever happened to you. For her, the devastation of betrayal had paved the way to the greatest role of her lifetime. The 1980s were her professional peak, but they also gave her something more profound, the chance to prove to herself that she could succeed on her own terms. She became one of television's most beloved stars, admired not only for her beauty and elegance but also for her strength. By the end of the decade, Linda Evans had achieved what once seemed impossible. She had turned tragedy into triumph. Life after Dynasty and stepping away. When Dynasty ended in 1989, Linda Evans stood at a crossroads. For nearly a decade, she had been one of television's most recognizable faces, adored by fans across the globe. Yet instead of chasing the next big role in Hollywood, Evans made a decision that surprised many. She walked away. By the early 1990s, Evans chose to step back from the entertainment industry almost entirely. She had spent years under the harsh lights of fame, and now she longed for something quieter. She moved to rural Washington state, far removed from the glamour of Los Angeles. There, she embraced a slower pace of life, tending to her home and focusing on her well-being rather than chasing the relentless demands of Hollywood. This choice was not without sacrifice. Stepping away meant fewer roles, fewer headlines, and less visibility in an industry that thrives on constant presence. But Evans had learned hard lessons from her past. She no longer measured her worth through marriage or through constant work. Instead, she sought peace and stability, something that had been elusive during her younger years. Even in semi-retirement, she remained in the public eye from time to time. Fans never forgot her, and her portrayal of Crystal Carrington continued to be celebrated as one of the defining roles of 1980s television. Still, Evans resisted the temptation to jump back into Hollywood. She had spent too much of her youth giving away control, first to John Derek, and later to the pressures of fame. Now she was determined to live on her own terms. The 1990s and 2000s became decades of self-reflection for Evans. While she occasionally appeared at reunions and special television events, her priority was living authentically. She found fulfillment in simple routines, in nature, and in surrounding herself with people who valued her for more than her celebrity. For Evans, this was a new kind of success, quieter, but no less important. By the time she entered her 70s, she had created a life defined not by scandal or heartbreak, but by resilience. Yet, just when many thought she had left acting behind for good, an unexpected project would bring her back to the screen. An unexpected return and reflection at 81. For decades, Linda Evans lived quietly in Washington state, far removed from the competitive world of Hollywood. Many assumed her acting career had ended permanently. But in 2019, an unexpected opportunity arrived that reignited her passion for performing. She read the script for a small but powerful film called Swan Song, a dark comedy about loss, dignity, and unexpected redemption. The story struck her deeply, and despite being away from the screen for years, Evans decided to take the leap. At 78, she found herself flying to Sandusky, Ohio, to film her first movie in decades. The project reminded her that her craft was still alive within her, and she was capable of embracing new challenges even in later life. When Swan Song was released in theaters and on demand, critics and fans celebrated her return, not just for the performance, but for the courage it symbolized. Evans herself called it outrageous, but also proof of her personal motto: anything is possible. By the time she turned 81, Evans was ready to speak openly about the darkest chapter of her past, the nightmare marriage to John Derek that nearly erased her identity. With remarkable candor, she revealed how close she had come to giving up and how deeply his betrayal with Bo Derek had wounded her. Yet instead of bitterness, she framed her story as one of survival. She admitted that losing Derek was devastating, but insisted it was also the best thing that ever happened to her, because it freed her to step into her own power and ultimately led her to dynasty. Looking back, Evans reflects with clarity and peace. She acknowledges the mistakes of her youth, the years lost to control and heartbreak, but she also sees how those experiences shaped her resilience. Her message is simple: the greatest revenge is happiness. And for Linda Evans, happiness came not from clinging to a destructive love, but from reclaiming her independence, rediscovering her craft, and choosing her own path. Linda Evans's story is proof that even the deepest heartbreak can become the beginning of something extraordinary. She lost her marriage, her confidence, and nearly her sense of self, but she gained a career that made her a legend and a life defined by peace and resilience. Do you think Linda Evans's strength came from the pain she endured, or would she have found her way to success without those struggles? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.